Hello and welcome to the show. This is actually a different time than normal, this live show. Here we are on Wednesday, and it's during the day, 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'm doing this show to accommodate my good friend over across the pond, Philip Mantle. He's on, and after him is Dr. David Clark. That's actually on another stream. So if you're on YouTube, I'll tell you about that at the end of this stream. So Philip Mantle is on this show for about an hour or so. He's going to be discussing his new book that came out on November 1st, Introducing UFOs, A Young Person's Guide. And it's written by him and illustrated by Ronald Kinsella. And he's quite an artist. And for the second part of the show, like I said, is Dr. David Clark. Over the last few decades, this is just my opinion here, because I've noticed over the last few decades, there's been in any type of public gathering, for instance, like a conference or something like that, there's been a huge drop in attendance of young people. Now, there is an exception to that, and that's Comic-Cons. They're heavily attended by young people. But I also should clarify, this is pre-COVID days, so nothing to do with the virus I'm talking about, prior to that. And, most likely after that, you're going to see it's just a very low attendance of people involved. And I saw this in the antiques world. People started talking about it several years ago. So in 2009, I started a podcast called the Antique Auction Forum to kind of, attract young people to get interested in the topic. I've had some success with that from some of the emails that I've gotten, but I attribute a lot of young people sort of drifting away is just the barrage of information and technology that is at their fingertips, and information thrown at them, and social media plays a big part in that. It just takes so much of the average young person's time. These are things that are important to them. For instance, someone young is much going to rather own the latest iPhone or iPad or whatever it is, rather than a work of art or something interesting that means a lot to someone, or a rare book, for instance. But anyway, Philip is his attempt to reach the younger people and sharing the UFO topic, I think, is admirable. And that's why I'm talking to him today. It's always a pleasure talking to him anyway. But just a couple of things. If you support the show, I want to thank you very much. And I can't really thank you enough for that. You can, if you're not, for $2 or more a month. And that's at patreon.com/Martin Willis Podcast UFO. That link is also on our website. And there's a one-time a year payment just came out as a new option for those people that don't want to have that monthly fee. But anyway, I am ready to bring in our guest now. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Good evening, Martin. Nice to speak to you again.
That's right. It is evening for you over there.
Yes, it is. Nice, yeah. Nice and dark and damp and cold. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it was, I'm on the coast of Maine, and I woke up this morning, it was like 27 degrees Fahrenheit here. And that is cold. So I'm not ready for it. It seems like we're robbed of the year, and I wanted summer to keep going, and it's not happening anymore.
No, it's cold and damp here, I can assure you, Martin. So maybe we should send some of this damp weather over to California and help them out.
Yeah, they could use it. That's for sure. Hey, so I want to talk to you about the book. How long had this been an idea of yours?
It's a good question, Martin. I mean, I've had the idea for a book like this, because it's aimed at a sort of a high school audience, for some years now. And when we went through the first lockdown, I thought to myself, well, now's the time to get on with it. I'd done some preliminary work on it, but I thought, well, can't go anywhere. Everything's closed. It's either write this book or, bury my wife under the patio in the back garden or something like that. But I thought, well, I need her to cut the grass anyway, so I better write a book instead, So I'd already got the idea to sort of lay out in my head. And so, it'd been around for a long while. The only thing I was looking for was an illustrator. And I knew Ronald, and I knew, what his work looked like. And I just thought it would be ideal. It kind of fitted in, exactly as I'd imagined. So I asked him, and thankfully Ronald Kinsella said yes. And so Introducing UFOs was born, so to speak. So, it's been knocking around for a while in my head, Martin. Yes.
Did you... you listen to the monologue, obviously you're trapped in the back there. Do you kind of agree with what I'm saying? Like there's a drop for the most part because of, that's what I attribute it to, technology and
you can
social media.
Yeah, you can blame it on whatever you like, but the facts remain that there is a shortfall of the next generation coming up behind us in this subject. And like you said, in a lot of other fields as well. And I'll give you an example. I know you've got an old friend of mine coming up after me, Dr. David Clark.
Yep.
Well, I remember, we're not that far different in age. I remember myself and David and others being sat at a UFO conference and people pointing at us. This is some years back, and they were saying, "There's the next generation," meaning us. So here we are, 30, 40 years on from that. And I'm looking behind me to see where the next generation is. I can't see them, but I decided to write this book in the hope that I might be able to assist them if they've got an interest, just to point them in the right direction, Martin. It's not to, tell them this is what UFOs are or anything like that. It is, to try and grab their attention. And if they have that interest, I'm not trying to indoctrinate them in any way, shape or form. The book allows them to make up their own mind, which I hope would do if they got involved in ufology in the first place. So that's how it all came about. We've been discussing with colleagues who were sort of in a similar age group, Martin. And the things we've talked about is what's going to happen with all our old files, when the time comes we're no longer here, because we don't have a repository for them here in the UK. Who's following on behind us? Yeah. Where's the next generation? So I'm sure they're there, but if we can just drag their attention away from their Xbox or their, like you said, their iPad or TikTok or whatever it is, just for a moment, then hopefully we've got something that can help them along the way.
I think it's important that, and I forget a lot of times, there's a lot of new people that listen to this show. And a lot of times I will talk with a guest and I won't go into the details. And that's a problem because, even though some of these people that have been listening since day one to my show, they don't want to hear this story again. But there's a percentage of people that are listening for the first time that never heard of certain cases. So I think this is where from what I've understood by your book, is you're giving them succinct, simple notations of what happened in the sighting, and not in deep detail, because if you capture them for a short amount of time for a span, basically.
I tried to put myself back when I was at high school. It's the kind of age when you start to get your own interests and your own hobbies, Martin. And, if somebody had put a huge, great encyclopedia in front of me, I would have just groaned. I thought, I'm not reading that. So, this book in total is just over 150 pages. It's not necessarily text heavy. So there isn't lots and lots of reading to do. There is enough. And of course, I put the salient pictures and photographs and, documents in there. I kind of mixed it up. And what I wanted to do with Ronald's artwork We have a unique piece of designer artwork to go with each chapter. Each chapter is laid out in decades, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc.
Oh.
And I just wanted a unique piece of artwork that's not meant to be exact. So the artwork is based on the first case for each chapter, just to grab their attention. And if I could grab their attention, like you said, just for a short while, that piece of artwork, hopefully then think, oh, I like that. That's cool. It will then entice them to go a little bit further. And the book is in paperback, so you have it the old-fashioned format, if you like, or you can download it as well. It's there in a Kindle. You can have it on your mobile phone or your iPad. I mean, I've downloaded it. I've no idea where it's gone. I have downloaded it somewhere, you know. So yeah. I stick to the paper version. I know where that one is. It's on my desk in front of me, you know. So that's, I tried to put myself back when I was getting first interested in this subject, which was when in those high school years. And I've had a couple of people said, "Oh, I wish we'd had something like that when I was a teenager, Philip," because I bought books by John Keel and Jacques Vallée, and I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. I was too young. I couldn't understand what they were saying. So I'm hoping, you know, I have a copy of the book that's going to go to my high school. Not that they'll remember me, Martin. I'm not a famous figure for anything at my high school, but I thought if nothing else, I'll make sure it gets in one high school, and that'll be the one that I went to. So that's ready to go in the mail to them. And
oh, that's great.
If nothing else, it'll be in the school library. Who knows? Who knows? But so I'm hoping we can help and like I said in the book, we've taken some of the well-known cases, like Roswell, like Betty and Barney Hill, like Travis Walton, but there's others that are perhaps not so well known as well, like the Knowles family from 1988 in Mundrabilla in Australia.
Right. The car that got picked up, supposedly. Yeah.
So that's a case that's fallen off the radar. So I thought I'll put that one in. And also to emphasize, of course, Martin, that whatever the UFO phenomena is, it is a global phenomena. It doesn't know any boundaries. It's not just in the United States or here in the UK. It is all over the world. And in the center of the book, I don't know about you, but when I used to pick a book up, first thing I used to do is thumb through it for the pictures.
Yeah, I used to always read the last page.
Well, I used to read the cover, the back cover, see what it said on there. And but I like to, so I you know, I'm biased. I like to have illustrations and pictures in. So what I did, I contacted a number of colleagues in different parts of the world. So look, I'm putting this book together. Which UFO photographs do you think I should include in it that are supposedly authentic? So we've got well-known ones like the Paul Trent at McMinnville and others, but there's some in there you probably will have never seen before. But the introduction to that section, it's called UFO Photo File, starts with a hoax. It's a hubcap, I think, from Project Blue Book. And the last word on the introduction says, make up your own mind. You know, so again, even though we're showing them photographs that are claimed to be the genuine article, we're saying you make up your own mind, you come to your own conclusions. And there's another section in there, Martin, that says a few little tips to do if you make a UFO sighting. You know, well, this is, you know, great. If you've got a camera, well, use it. You know, if there's somebody else standing nearby, draw their attention to it. Make sure you check the time and the date and the location, so you've got all that information. Little things like that. And then, of course, to round it all off, I haven't said UFOs are X, Y, or Z. What I've said is, here are 3 theories. There are more, but here are 3 for you to consider. Extraterrestrial, some kind of secret military vehicles, or some kind of rare natural phenomena. Again, there are more theories than that, but you go away and make up your own mind. Yeah. So, you know, that's the way the whole book flows. And hopefully
that's great.
We've got something right. I keep my fingers crossed.
You know, I had the UFO sighting that I had, you know, it wasn't spectacular, but it was still a UFO sighting. but that was back in 2006. And I had no idea when I saw this thing what I was supposed to do. And the funny thing is, it never occurred to me to look online. I never thought never knew anything about a MUFON or whatever. So I called a police department. I mean, so do you kind of have that laid out too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Report it. Report it, because there may be others that have seen exactly the same thing and have also reported it. And whilst our Ministry of Defence no longer deals with it, our police are duty bound to deal with it. It may not be the list of their priorities, so you might not get a police car with its blue light flashing, but they are duty bound to take it seriously. And but yes, to report it. That's why it's important to take the correct time. Just check your watch or your phone what time it was, location you were in, and that enables you, if need be, for an investor to go back and stand in the exact same spot you were. And there may be a logical explanation for it that you hadn't perhaps thought about before. So, because we know most UFO sightings do have an explanation. So the more information, I mean, I've spoken to so many people, Martin. They said, "Oh, I had a camera with me, but I never thought to use it."
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
use it, and
you're just baffled by the incident when it happens, though. I mean, I didn't have I don't think I had my phone on me at the time, but I never thought of anything but just staring at this thing. I mean, like, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing.
Well, that's it. And if if you stood at a bus stop and there's somebody else there, and they're looking in the opposite direction, and say, "Excuse me, what do you make of that?" And don't be afraid. And if they ignore you, well, then fair enough. I know we're living in different days today, but this was written with without the COVID in it. So hopefully it will help. I'm not saying it's got everything in there, but it will hopefully assist the next generation that's coming along behind us. I'm sure they're there somewhere, Martin. It's just dragging, like you said, dragging them away from their technology.
Yeah. Another thing I think is important. I don't know if you list this in the book or not, but I think it's very important for someone to immediately write everything down. I mean, I don't know if you had that in your book or not, but I think personally, drawings, writing everything down, like you said, the time, location, what it looked like, where directions, if you can, where it was coming from or going or whatever.
Well, one of the good things about the technology today, and I'm sure I've got it on my smartphone, although I would not be able to find it anywhere. You can actually just pick it up and record a message into it.
That's true. Yeah.
You don't have to write it down anymore. You said, I'm standing here, I'm looking at X. It's 3:15 in the afternoon, and I've just seen this, and you've got it there for all time. You can share that then with others. The technology is fantastic to be able to assist in this fashion now. So
true.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have my kit. I used to have a bag with a camera in it, binoculars, a compass, and, which was always more important to me most of the time, a tape recorder, the old cassette recorder, and a notebook and pen, and a spare pen as well, because I used them more than anything, really. But today they've got digital technology, I think, taken place of that. But you're right, document it in whatever way you can.
Yeah, it's funny. This is really nothing to do with UFOs, but it's kind of a point. I was down at the Boston Commons during the summer, and I look up and there's one of the blimps flying over, and I thought it was really cool. So, I'm going to film this. By the time I got my camera, you know how slow a blimp goes, very, very slow. By the time I got my camera out in my phone, did the password, got the video up and started filming, I just caught the tail end of it going over the trees were hiding it. I mean, it really, that's the problem a lot of times with UFOs when it comes to picture taking.
Yeah.
Is that, that wasn't even a UFO, but I mean, just the fact that, by the time you get all ready, you say you have your camera, your recorder and everything, but a lot of times by the time you get it out, it's just whatever it is already gone. you
Well,
know.
that may be our generation, Martin. I've seen my daughter with the thumbs, and they're like, they're almost on fire. And I'm amazed that you mentioned a password. I wouldn't know how to put a password on mine. So, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never taken a selfie. I tried it once, and it didn't work. So, I'll just stick with the normal stuff. I was brought up on the old 35mm cameras.
Oh yeah.
With real film in it,
Same here. Yeah.
But I've seen my two daughters. They're like, just they can use them as if it's just part of them. And even my youngest granddaughter, sorry, my oldest granddaughter, she's 10, and she looks at me as if I'm from the Stone Age when I talk about these things.
Has your family, even your grandchildren and all that, do they think it's interesting that you have explored this topic for so long?
Yes, certainly. My two daughters, not the grandchildren, they're a bit young for it. Although
I see.
I did make a TV series this year.
Oh yeah,
it's on Amazon, so I'll give it a plug. It's called Alien Autopsy: The Search for Answers.
Yeah.
So it's a 4-part series all about the alien autopsy film, and of course, my daughter put it on the TV, and there's the three of the 5 grandchildren sat there thinking, "What's Granddad doing on the television?" They couldn't really understand it.
Yeah.
And they were kind of looking at it and thinking, "Is this real?" But yet, Granddad was on the television, so they just thought that was amazing,
Yeah.
And but my 2 children, I have a stepson, but my 2 girls have grown up with it. Of course, it's always been part of their life. They're not interested in the subject, but they've always shown an interest in what I've been doing and what's next on. What's Dad doing now? Oh, that looks great. My youngest girl, Shona, she's got a lot of my books, and so she's got them on the bookshelf. I'm not saying she's ever read them, Martin, but she's got them.
I hope you sign them for her.
Of course, yes.
My son's the same way. My son is a real deep thinker and thinks, there can be something to this, but he thinks there really is something possibly to the Ariel school incident, for one.
Yeah.
But other than that, he's, I would say a healthy skeptic for the most part, thinking there's usually an answer, and there is usually an answer for whatever it is. But like I'm sure you've heard a million times, it only takes one, real incident to change everything we know.
Well,
really.
yes.
I mean, if it could only be proven.
Well, we were talking about it before we came on, so if you like, we'll talk about Pascagoula.
Sure, yeah.
For those that don't know, a few years back, when I began my little publishing company called Flying Disc Press, I obtained the rights to republish Charles Hickson and William Mendes' book that came out in 1983 called UFO Contact at Pascagoula. It was a case that had always been fascinated in, but it was one of those cases that disappeared off the radar. So in the process of publishing or republishing that book, I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I could find Calvin Parker and get an interview with him? I knew Charles Hickson had passed away. I didn't know anything about William Mendes, but I thought, I think Calvin may still be around. So I set off on a hunt to try and track him down. I went to the you would think the right places to begin with, which was the UFO groups that are around in America. I'm not going to mention any names, but one of them had a branch in Mississippi, because that's where Pascagoula is. I thought I'll ask them. Not only did they not know where Calvin Parker was, Martin, they had never heard of the Pascagoula case.
Wow.
Never heard of it. And I was dumbstruck. So I put out a request, and there was a certain gentleman by the name of Martin Willis that was responsible for putting me in touch with Calvin Parker.
Well, it's been my pleasure.
Yeah. Well, when I spoke to Calvin first, he was very polite, but didn't say an awful lot. And unbeknown to me, what had happened prior to me contacting him was him and his wife had been to a funeral, a friend's funeral. And I don't know if it was a book of condolence or whatever, Martin. He signed something in the church, and he signed it Calvin Parker. And of course, those coming behind him are sort of going, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know, the guy who was abducted. So Calvin thought this was a bit disrespectful, you know, because they were at a funeral. Anyway, his wife Wynette said, well, why don't you write a book? And then everybody will know your story. Because he'd never told it in full anywhere, really. So he said, yeah, okay. He just tried to placate his wife. And then, of course, I appeared on the scene, not wanting a book, just an interview. And it was at that point, I think, again, he said, yeah, I'm thinking of writing a book. So I said, well, I may be able to help. And he'd made some notes, which he sent me. And I said, well, do you want to do it? And, you know, with me and Wynette, he didn't really have a choice in the end. But kind of long story short, Calvin wrote Pascagoula, the closest encounter, my story. Came out in 2018 and it went on to be an Amazon bestseller, which was great. But what did happen, Martin, as a result, is that other people started to come forward.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I saw something that night. And I'll give you an example. And
wait, Philip, can I just interrupt you for a second? Because we're kind of going back to the point where, can we just do a nutshell of the incident, just because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of new people listening that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, back on the 11th of October, 1973, Charles Hickson, who was 42, Calvin Parker, who was 18, almost 19. Calvin had moved out there to get a job in the shipyard, working with his father's friend, Charles Hickson. He was engaged to be married, was Calvin, and he wanted a steady job. So this is 200 miles from home. It was his first day on the job, working in the shipyard as a welder. But one thing the two men did share was their love of fishing. And of course, they were right by the Pascagoula River. So Charlie says, do you want to go fishing tonight? Yeah, great. Grab some gear, you know, drive out and buy some bait. And they're driving to an old pier because Charlie knew the area. And as they're driving in, they pass a car that's parked up already. It's got a courting couple in it. And a no entry sign, and Calvin's not happy with that. But Charlie says, don't worry about it. You know, I come here all the time. So they tried one spot and they just got, invaded by insects. So they moved to an old abandoned pier and sat on that. So you've just got the water in front of you and all this stuff behind you and the fishing away. And, Calvin's in fishing mode. He's just thinking of the fish and he sees a boat. And then there's a blue light behind them. Calvin thinks, I knew we shouldn't have ignored that no entry sign. It's the police. We're going to spend the night in jail. Of course, when both men turned around, it wasn't the police. There was a large rugby ball shaped object descending. Calvin's first thought was to run back to his car because I think he had a handgun in it, but he couldn't get past this thing and there was only the water behind them. It was giving off this really intense hazy blue light, which hurt their eyes. It stopped just a couple of feet above the ground. There was two lights on one end. An opening appeared as if from nowhere. Three humanoid creatures, again, floated out. They didn't touch the floor. They literally floated across the ground towards them. Calvin described them. It's even now he calls them the big uglies. They were humanoid, but they'd no neck. They had carrot-like protrusions sticking out the side and one out the front. Their hands were like mittens or claws. Their legs remained together all the time, and they were wrinkled. They were grey-coloured, but they were wrinkled like elephant skin. Two grabbed hold of Charlie. One got hold of Calvin. Calvin was petrified. He was terrorised. And then he said he felt some kind of prick in his arm, and that relaxed him. Cutting a long story short, they were both taken on board this thing. They were separated. Calvin said this thing descended from the roof and went around him as if it was taking pictures or x-rays or whatever. And then he felt they got hold of him again, felt another prick in his arm, so it calmed him down, and they were deposited back on the pier. And this thing was off, gone. And they debated for quite some time what to do. And Calvin didn't want to tell anybody. He said, they'll think we're nuts. Yeah, that's what they look like. And he was terrified. And I mean, I use that word correctly. So they jump in his car, they take off, and then they have a change of heart, or rather Charlie does, and persuades Calvin to pull in at a phone box, public call box. He phones the nearby Keesler Air Force Base, and they say, we don't investigate UFOs anymore. Ring the police. So they ring the police, and it's actually the sheriff who says, stay there, and we'll send a car out. And so a car came out and drove them into town, escorted them, if you like. They were interviewed separately. They told the story. However, Calvin at that point had agreed with Charlie that Charlie would tell the story, and they would claim that Calvin had passed out, so he couldn't remember anything.
Right. Yeah.
So they were interviewed by the police, by the sheriff. They were then put in a room together, and there was a desk next to them, and they were left alone. And unbeknown to them, there was a tape recorder playing in the desk, recording what they were saying. And after about 10 minutes, the police come and took this tape. Again, they weren't aware of what they'd taken out of it. They played it back, and of course, they thought, we'll catch them now. But they weren't. They were still terrified. This is known as the secret tape. Calvin's praying almost at one point, saying, I've got to get something for my nerves, what we're going to do. So it was at that point the sheriff began to believe them, and they went home. They decided to go to work the next day and try and put it all behind them. Somehow the story got out and it hit the headlines. They were bombarded by the media. Cutting a long story short, Charlie did take the front. He spoke to the journalists. He went on television, went to the UFO conferences. Calvin went the opposite way. He went back home. A few weeks later, he ended up in hospital with a breakdown. He got married, and he tried to keep away from the subject. He occasionally popped up, but he tried to, not have any involvement. And it was only when I teamed up with him in 2018 that he decided that now's the time to tell everything.
Yeah.
Because not only that, 20 years later, he had another encounter while he was fishing on his own. And him and a friend of his tracked down the late Bud Hopkins and put Calvin under aggressive hypnosis. And so, we had that information at hand. I also uncovered that Charles Hickson had also been hypnotized by Bud Hopkins twice.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, in 2 different years. So we managed to find those tapes as well. And so Calvin did, this is a really interesting story. Calvin did a little local television piece, and somebody put it up on YouTube, Martin. Yeah. And there was a comment underneath it, amongst many, and I read it, and it said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night, and they too saw the UFO.
Yeah.
That kind of grabbed my attention, so there's a name. So I contacted this person. She says, yep, my mum and dad were more than willing to speak to you. I've asked them, and they were Mr. and Mrs. Blair. And I spoke to them. And what they told us was they were indeed on the other side of the river at that point. It's a big river. Mr. Blair worked in the fishing industry and was waiting for a boat to come in, and it was late. So he'd had a nap in the back of his car, and he wasn't in the best of moods. And they saw the blue light over the opposite bank of the river. Mrs. Blair said it looked like it was lost, or as if it was looking for something. It was kind of... And Mr. Blair saw it, and then his boat came in. But by this time it's dark, so they're walking along this little pier, and Mrs. Blair said there was this huge splash in the water next to us. And she says, when I looked down, there's a grey man in the water. That's what she called it. That's not my word. She called it a grey man.
Wow.
In the water, she said it went under the water and was gone. She ran up to the boat, threw her husband's belongings on the boat, and turned around and ran. Because she had to go back to the car. He was going out fishing, she had to go back the way. So, and then of course the next day she sees Charlie and Calvin's story on the TV. But Mr. Blair said, we're not going to tell anybody. We're not going to say anything. At that point, he'd only admitted to seeing the blue lights. So, you know, we spoke to him, we interviewed them. Some time passed, and unfortunately, Mr. Blair took ill. And he spoke to me and he said, Philip, I'm going to tell you for the first time, and I've just told my wife, I too saw the humanoid that night. That was, again, his word was humanoid. Excuse me. He says, I saw it come up out of the water, go back across the river, and I saw the UFO take off. And sadly, a few months later, Mr. Blair passed away. But he wanted to tell us that. I think he had it in the back of his mind, Martin, that his days might be sadly numbered. And Mrs. Blair had always had, she said to me right from the beginning, she said, Philip, I've often wondered if something similar didn't happen to me and my husband that night that happened to Charlie and Calvin. And, you know, we have, and there's more. That's just one, Martin. You know, it's fascinating. Again, another gentleman that night on the other side of the river is a chap called Lewis Lee. Mr. Lee was working in the shipyard as a crane driver. And he said, my cab in my crane was about 10 or 12 feet off the ground. And he said, as soon as I got in it, he said, I could see this thing out across the river, this blue diamond, he called it. I can't do a Mississippi accent, I'm sorry, but he said it's the darndest thing I've ever seen. And he watched it for about 10 minutes. And the only reason he took his eyes off it is because he had a load on his crane and his friend is shouting, watch what you're doing, you know?
Yeah.
So he dealt with his load on his crane and looked back and it was now gone. So, you know, those are just two out of, I would say, a couple of dozen witnesses we've got from around that area, either just before it happened or just after. Yeah. So, you know, we've got sightings from all around there. And what is interesting, I asked Calvin if he got any documents or photographs or anything. He said everything he had was lost in Hurricane Katrina. His house was under 10, 12 feet of water. So I contacted all the UFO groups, and the Center for UFO Studies sent me a PDF file. It was all they had on the case. Most of it was newspaper cuttings. However, right in the middle of it is a one-page typewritten document. And the reason I know it's typewritten and not written on a word processor is because they've typed the date wrong and they've just gone back over it and retyped it. So it was dated the 13th of October, 1973. And it's headlined Puncture Wounds.
Oh, yeah.
Describes a physical examination of both Charlie and Calvin. The only thing they didn't examine was their private parts, and that they found puncture wounds on both men. Now, bearing in mind, Calvin said he felt some kind of pinprick which calmed him down. And we don't know who wrote that document. There's no name on it. But we have an idea what we think it was. But it's fascinating nonetheless, Martin. And I'll give you another example. A couple of weeks after the event, just a bit further out in the same river, there are two little boats fishing. They're all friends. And believe it or not, they saw something under the water. They said it looked like a parachute shaped, about 30 feet in diameter. It was illuminated white, although it had a brownish tint to it, but that was just the water making it brownish. And not only that, they got so close to it, Martin, they hit it with one of the paddles off the boat, and it went clunk. So they went and reported it in person to the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard sent a boat out, and the Coast Guard saw it as well. And the Coast Guard also hit it. So we managed to obtain all the Coast Guard documents about this. And then in a file, I was also sent a photograph of all the witnesses, all those fishermen. It's a colour photograph. They're all lined up. And on the back of the photograph is their names and their age. And so we recently put that photograph on social media. Yeah, that's the Puncture Wounds document.
Yeah, I really can't make it any larger than that, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah,
it's all right. So we put this photograph of these people who were fishing that night, and within a couple of hours, with people saying, "We know these people. They're deceased. They're deceased. They're deceased." Oh, but I think he's still alive. So there's about 7 or 8 of them. And within no time, I had a lady contact me and say, "Yeah, I'm related to that person. He's still alive." And again, the same day, we had his telephone number passed to us, and he was willing to speak to us. And we have a colleague of mine by the name of Dr. Irina Scott.
Oh, yeah.
In the States. Irina spoke to him and interviewed him, took a full statement from him. And he was one of those fishermen that night with this thing with one of the paddles off the boat, and it went clunk. And he says the next day, the Navy were involved. And he says, I took them out to where the incident was, but he couldn't see anything. It was just water. So things happened afterwards as well, Martin, which is I find fascinating. And we got an amazing statement from him. We really did. Where they were, this location is not out in the middle of nowhere. That's what we should emphasize. So we thought we might find other witnesses because of where it happened. This is not Roswell out in the desert. This is right next. People still go fishing at the same spot. It's just that the pier's not there anymore. And over the river, it goes Highway 90, a huge great road bridge. So some people criticize the case. We'll say, why didn't some of the drivers on the bridge see it? Well, they did, because we spoke to one. And again, Irina interviewed him, and he was in the car with his wife driving across the bridge. And he said, Philip, I thought it was an aircraft of some description that was going to crash. There was this blue light down below us, right where Charlie and Kelvin were. And he said, I watched it for about 30 seconds. My wife didn't see it because she was sat on the other side of the car. She couldn't see it from where she was sitting. But what was interesting, this gentleman said, the next day I drove, I think it was his aunt's. He said, I drove down to my aunt's, who lived down by the river. I didn't say anything. And before I had a chance to speak to her, she says, you'll never know, you'll never guess what I saw last night. She'd seen the same thing. Yeah. Those are just a few of the many examples we've got. So a lot of these were in Calvin's follow-up book, which is called Pascagoula, The Story Continues. But but we've interviewed more since that book was published. And it's all down to you, Martin, because it was you that put me in touch with Calvin Parker. And I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad it worked out the way it did. And it's I'll just tell a little backstory to that. Is I had a blogger at the time, Michael Lauk was his name, and he wrote a story about the Pascagoula incident, and he was always very thorough and did nice work. So I got this email one day, and it said, "That's a very accurate and nicely written blog about that incident." And then I saw him sign it, Calvin Parker. So I wrote him back and said, well, wait a minute. And, his email says fishing, he still loves to fish. So I wrote him back and I said, so is this the Calvin Parker? If so, would you be up for an interview? And so I had interviewed him. He hadn't been interviewed for years and years and years. And I felt really honored to interview him. He's such a gentleman. And a lot of people think because he's Southern, has a Southern accent, maybe he's not, I'm not saying this, but I've had people just assume that maybe he's not all that bright or whatever. The guy is sharp. And he's had a major construction company. He's done all kinds of amazing things. He's a real sharp guy. And what a gentleman. He's just such a nice man.
Absolutely. I mean, Calvin and I and his wife, Wynette, we've become friends. Yeah. And like you say, he didn't have any great formal education. Calvin will admittedly say he was the brawns and his brother was the brains. If anybody picked on his brother, they had Calvin to deal with. but he was nonetheless not stupid. He just didn't like school. And so he's a self-educated man. He can do calculus. He is a clever guy, but just doesn't have a formal education. So there is a difference. And sadly, his brother is no longer with us. But Calvin's led a fascinating life in some respects. And what I can say is that just by chance, we were contacted by a TV and film producer in California, and he's it's no secret. He's done a contract with Calvin, not with me. It's with Calvin, and has written a screenplay. It's finished. But and I've been allowed to read it, and it is very, very accurate. I can assure you, Martin, and it is a fascinating story. And he's just sort of tweaking it a little bit at the moment. So hopefully, at some point, we may see it either on the big screen or the small screen. And Calvin, the most important point is that Calvin likes it.
Yeah,
and he's giving it the green light.
Yeah,
and,
that's good, because he's told me before, when I asked him that question, he said that he will bow out of anything, if someone tries to sensationalize, he's not interested in that.
No,
and he's not interested in money either. That's not anything that motivates Calvin.
No, when we wrote the book, Calvin said, I thought we'd sell about 10 copies. But of course, the first one went on to be an Amazon bestseller, and the second one did okay as well. So there's nothing wrong with that, but certainly it wasn't anything we expected to happen.
Yeah,
we just wanted to tell his story, and that's how we remain. And I was thinking about putting that story and introducing UFOs, but I got so close to it, and I got so much information. I thought I can't really do it justice in just 3 or 4 pages.
Sure.
So I purposely, left it out.
That one is so complicated because of the beings and the floating and the examination, and oh God, that is just such a complicated case. But we are right near the end of our time. I do want to say this: a lot of times people have contacted me. I talked to you about this off air, and they'll say, why do you talk about the old cases? Well, here's a really good example why, when you talk about the old cases, all of a sudden you find new information, new witnesses that are finally at this time in their life feeling comfortable about coming out about it. So I think it's a great service you've done. I've tried to put other people in your hands because of this wonderful job you've done with Calvin. And I don't know if any has worked out, but at least you did a wonderful job with Calvin. And
I'm convinced that if we had all these witnesses take their testimony to court, Martin, we could prove that something happened that night. I'm not saying we'd prove it was abducted by aliens, but we could prove our case. That's why it's important to keep an eye on these old cases. That's right.
That's right. Philip, as usual, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, it's my pleasure, Martin. And please give my regards to Dr. Clark. We're old friends.
I will. And, I'll tell him what you said, too.
Yes, please do. He'll smile. He'll laugh.
Yeah. All right. You take care. All right.
Good night. God bless, Martin.
All right. Bye now. All right, everyone. So if you're on YouTube now, just all you have to do is skip over to the other stream, which is with David Clark, coming up in about 10 minutes from now. So thank you so much. And that is it for this segment of the show.